Arthur, my daughter, Clara's husband, viewed me as little more than a doddering old woman, blissfully unaware of his true machinations. He'd often slink into my private study, convinced I was deep in a dreamless sleep, systematically sifting through my belongings perpetually, on the hunt for something of considerable worth. But on that fateful night, as he slid open the concealed drawer, intending to retrieve what he believed were the access codes to the family strongbox, his face first blanched to the color of bone, then swiftly shifted to an unnerving greenish-yellow. What lay nestled within those velvet confines utterly redefined his existence. And I, from the shadowed corner, merely offered a silent, private smile. The tranquil hum of our dinner conversation shattered the moment Arthur's voice pierced the air, causing my silver fork to hover suspended over my plate. "Eleanor," he began, his tone deceptively casual, "that vault in your master's suite, what sort of security mechanism does it employ?" Clara, mid-sip, visibly recoiled, nearly spluttering her water. "Arthur, what an odd thing to ask," she interjected, but his gaze remained locked on mine, expectant. A chilling, almost reptilian calculation flickered in his eyes, tightening something cold in my gut. I deliberately placed my fork beside my half-eaten salmon, a silent plea for more time. "Just a passing interest in home defense," he continued, a practiced saccharine grin stretching across his lips. "With all the recent incursions in the vicinity, you understand." Incursions, I queried, genuinely bewildered. I had resided in this estate for over 2 decades. The most dramatic event had been the disappearance of Old Man Hemmings's prize-winning poodle last autumn. Arthur waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, they keep it quiet, of course, to prevent mass hysteria. But a matriarch of your venerable age living solitary in such an expansive residence. Surely you've implemented formidable defenses." Clara shifted and clearly uneasy. "Mother has always been meticulous about securing the manor." "Precisely. But what of contingencies?" Arthur's tone grew sharper, more probing. "I mean, if anything untoward were to befall you, heaven forbid, Clara would need to be apprised of the whereabouts of all vital assets, wouldn't she?" The very air in the dining room seemed to constrict around us. My gaze fixated on Arthur's countenance, observing the almost imperceptible dilation of his pupils as he casually invoked my hypothetical demise, the restless drumming of his fingertips against the polished mahogany when I failed to offer an immediate reply. "All my affairs are meticulously ordered," I stated at last. "Clara is privy to all necessary information, but is she privy to the location of the medallion?" The query hung in the tense silence like an unspoken accusation. Clara's bewildered gaze flickered between us, a furrow forming between her brows. "What medallion?" she murmured. Arthur's smile broadened, revealing too much teeth. "The one tucked away in your mother's bureau drawer. The one that— How do you know about anything in my private bureau?" My words emerged with an unintended sharp edge. For a fleeting instant, Arthur's polished facade fractured. A chilling, utterly ruthless glint pierced through his eyes before the guise of the solicitous son-in-law was expertly redonned. "Was merely searching for some headache remedy last week, when a dreadful migraine afflicted me," he smoothly explained. "Clara suggested I check your linen closet, but I regrettably opened the wrong compartment initially. My apologies for the intrusion." Clara nodded swiftly. "Oh, I recall that migraine. You were truly indisposed." But I too recalled that day with perfect clarity. Arthur had spent nearly half an hour upstairs, citing an upset stomach post-dinner. Ample time for more than a casual search for painkillers. "The analgesics are in the apothecary cabinet," I stated calmly. "They always have been." Arthur's jaw clenched a barely perceptible tremor. Must have been completely disoriented by the agony then. The discussion thereafter devolved into a halting, strained affair, yet Arthur persistently gravitated back to his morbid inquiries. Questions concerning my financial institutions, about others with access to the estate, about the minutiae of my daily schedule. Every probe felt like a surgeon's finger testing the depth of an open laceration, seeking vulnerability. When the protracted dinner finally concluded, Clara sprang up to attend to the clearing. "I'll oversee the tidying this evening, Mother. You prepared the feast." "It's no bother," I replied, already methodically stacking the heirloom china. It was my nightly ritual, my method of distilling the day's revelations. This particular night, I craved the comforting cadence of scrubbing and polishing. "Come along, dear," Arthur murmured to Clara, his hand already resting proprietarily on her arm. "Allow your mother her dominion over her culinary sanctum. We ought to seek repose." They ascended the grand staircase, and the faint creak of their bedroom door reached me. Their bedroom door finally clicked shut. But even as I meticulously polished the last of the crystal flutes, Arthur's veiled inquiries gnawed at me. His unnerving familiarity with the medallion, a relic I'd assumed was a secret known only to me, echoed in the quiet kitchen. Then there was his chillingly cavalier discussion of my hypothetical demise and Clara's future inheritance. My hands performing the familiar choreography of wash, rinse, and stack felt divorced from a mind that was now frantically sifting through weeks of unsettling observations. Arthur's conveniently vague business ventures, his persistent probes into my substantial assets, and the predatory gleam in his eyes as he assessed my estate, like a general plotting a siege. The final silver glinted as I hung the linen, the kitchen a beacon of tranquil order. Yet the air had thickened with a pervasive sense of vulnerability. My sanctuary, once impenetrable, now felt porous, its defenses compromised. Above, a low murmur of voices from their quarters ceased abruptly, leaving a heavy quiet. It was time to confront the silent, insidious truths that had begun to unfurl within my own walls. As I ascended the grand staircase, a cold wave of apprehension washed over me. My bedroom door, usually latched firmly, stood ajar, a sliver of inky blackness hinting at disturbance. My fingers tightened reflexively on the polished banister. I distinctly recalled closing it before descending for dinner. Decades of solitary living had ingrained the ritual of securing my personal space, a habit only recently softened by Clara's return. Yet Clara and Arthur occupied the guest suite at the far end of the hall. There was absolutely no legitimate reason for anyone to have entered my private chambers. I stood motionless, breath held for a full half-minute, straining to detect any sound. The guest room remained silent, the upper floor devoid of movement, save for the familiar whispers of the old house settling around its foundations and the frantic thrumming of my own heart. I nudged the door forward, bracing for the telltale groan of ancient hinges. It swung open silently, an eerie, almost conspiratorial quiet. The well-oiled hinges offered no protest, a silence more unsettling than any creak. Crossing the threshold into my most private sanctuary felt like entering a meticulously staged crime scene. Initially, everything appeared undisturbed. The opulent silk comforter lay precisely smoothed its corners, tucked with military precision. My reading spectacles rested on the antique nightstand, exactly where I'd placed them. The alabaster lamp was angled perfectly, but my perception, honed by decades of meticulous order and an almost obsessive attention to detail, instantly registered the subtle betrayals. The closet door, which I invariably shut with unwavering precision, now gaped a telltale 4 inches, a silent accusation. Such a minor misalignment would have pricked at my subconscious all night. My heirloom dresser drawers, usually flush with seamless perfection, were now subtly misaligned. The second drawer from the top, the repository of my most sensitive documents, protruded ever so slightly, a clumsy tell. A corner of a thick manila file peeked out a bold yellow challenge. My stomach tightened into a knot of cold dread. I glided to the dresser, easing the drawer open fully. The contents within bore the unmistakable imprint of hurried rummaging. Papers, ostensibly returned to their rightful places, were jumbled, meticulously organized insurance policies, now mingled haphazardly with a chaotic stack of bank statements. My last will and testament, typically nestled securely within a designated subfolder at the very rear, had been carelessly shifted to the forefront. And then my gaze dropped to the underside of the drawer's lip. The small tarnished brass key, a discreet item I'd taped there years ago, was missing. I traced the faint outline of dried adhesive with a trembling finger. Nothing remained but a phantom residue. The key. The very key that operated the manual override of my master, except the very safe Arthur had so innocently inquired about just hours earlier, had been located and purloined. A tremor ran through my hands, not from terror, but from a burgeoning, furious indignation. This was no arbitrary act, no chance opportunism. Someone had deliberately breached my innermost sanctuary, systematically ransacking it, with a surgical precision hunting for particular objects. Someone possessed foreknowledge, an intimate understanding of my most guarded secrets and their precise locations. I moved with grim resolve to the safe, a compact but formidable unit anchored deep within my walk-in wardrobe. Its digital interface still glowed reassuringly, but the display was meaningless now. Arthur now held the physical key to its manual override. Standing amidst the decades of accumulated memories and treasures that filled my closet, I felt a stark, visceral nakedness. How long had this elaborate scheme been underfoot? How many clandestine visits had he paid to this very room, while Clara and I, oblivious, discussed mundane affairs downstairs? The transgression transcended mere larceny. This was a profound, intimate invasion. Someone had laid hands on my most confidential documents, pored over my financial legacy, desecrated objects that held deeply personal significance. The meticulously constructed bulwarks of my private world, once impenetrable. My private world had been violated with chilling precision. But Arthur had made a fatal error. He'd underestimated me, assuming I was nothing more than a fading matriarch too preoccupied with pleasantries and too weary to discern the threads of deceit. He was gravely mistaken. With deliberate slowness, I nudged the dresser drawer shut, restoring every item to its feigned position. Arthur must remain convinced of his stealth, of the undetected nature of his trespass. Let him nurture his illusion of secrecy. Let him continue to weave his treacherous tapestry. For now, I possessed the critical knowledge of his true intentions. This wasn't merely a matter of desperation or a passing lapse in judgment. This was grand larceny, meticulously planned and executed by a predator who had devoted weeks, perhaps months, to dissecting my habits and identifying my weaknesses. A predator who even now lay sleeping mere paces from my daughter, Clara. I extinguished the bedroom lamp, resuming the familiar rhythms of my nightly preparations for rest. Yet each movement now felt performative, enacted for an unseen observer. Was Arthur even now attuned to my quiet movements? Had he sensed my discovery? As I drew back the silken covers, a single sharp resolve solidified in my mind. The dawn would herald the commencement of my meticulous evidence-gathering. This night, however, demanded only wakefulness, only strategic contemplation. First, I needed to map the full extent of this clandestine war. Slumber, I knew, was utterly unattainable. Immobilized, I stared at the shadowed ceiling, my thoughts ceaselessly replaying the evening's damning revelations. Each subtle tremor of the house, every whisper of wind rustling through the ancient oaks outside, the distant, almost imperceptible thrum of the refrigerator from the lower kitchen. Each sound now drew me taut with suspicion. Just before midnight, I discerned a faint shift below. Soft, deliberate footsteps traversed the polished expanse of the drawing-room floor. Not Clara's familiar graceful tread, but something weightier, more purposeful. Arthur. I remained frozen, meticulously regulating my breath, my ears straining as the sounds drifted towards the mansion's entrance. Then a voice barely discernible through the aged floorboards reached me. Yes, it's me. Everyone's deep in slumber. A hushed telephone call. Arthur, at the dead of night, was conducting a clandestine conversation, speaking in tones he believed were impervious to eavesdropping. I eased myself upright in the bed, painstakingly avoiding any telltale rustle of the mattress springs. The cool kiss of the hardwood floor registered on my bare soles as I crept towards the ornate heating register, a conduit connecting my private sanctuary to the grand salon below. Sound in this venerable old house often took unpredictable routes through its labyrinthine ducts. The matriarch's coffers are undeniably overflowing. Arthur's voice, now clearer, drifted upward thick with greed. I located the entire trove, bank statements, investment portfolios, every last detail. This isn't just a substantial sum, it's a fortune. My blood congealed in my veins. We're talking. He wasn't operating in solitude. Tomorrow evening, Arthur continued, his voice lowering conspiratorially. Clara has her usual book club, every Tuesday, 7 to 9. It presents an ideal window. I snatched my phone from the bedside table, my fingers trembling as I navigated to the voice recording application. Whatever fresh depravity was about to be unveiled, I needed irrefutable proof. I already possessed the safe key, Arthur was declaring, his voice laced with triumph. Secured it earlier tonight while they were occupied with dinner. The old woman keeps all her vital possessions there. Cash, jewels, likely a trove of further financial data. The insolent wretch. I pressed the record icon, just as his tone shifted, growing bolder, more self-assured. Listen, I understand your reservations about the schedule, but my gambling obligations aren't vanishing. Those individuals aren't known for their patience, if you grasp my meaning. This absolutely must proceed now. Gambling debts. The pieces of the grotesque puzzle clicked into place. The raw desperation, the cold, calculating methodology, the utter willingness to shatter my daughter Clara's trust. Arthur wasn't merely a casual opportunist. He was a man cornered by his own recklessness, driven to the precipice of his folly. The matriarch is merely a solitary, trusting soul. Arthur's voice now dripped with contempt, probably emboldened by the complicity. She has no comprehension of the fate awaiting her. Indeed, she even broached the subject of home security during dinner tonight. Essentially, she handed me precisely the intelligence I required. A scalding, all-consuming fury ignited in my breast. The casual dismissiveness in his tone, the way he had reduced my very existence to a convenient archetype, a simple, exploitable target. But I ruthlessly suppressed the surge of indignation, forcing myself to remain utterly silent, to keep recording. The genius of it is he'd never suspect kin. Should Eleanor realize anything's amiss, Clara will merely assure her it's a lapse of memory, a common foible of age. The audacity, I am 66, not 96. My mind is a steel trap, every word, every nuance of this call etched within. By Thursday, all traces will be erased. I'll inform Clara of a sudden imperative career opportunity in another state. We'll vanish before the Dowager even comprehends the extent of her loss." Arthur paused, a beat of silence on his end, as he absorbed his accomplice's reply. A low, chilling chuckle reverberated from the receiver, a sound that sent tendrils of ice down my spine. Perhaps she should have been more discerning about the company she kept in her own abode. Arthur sneered. "A valuable life lesson, wouldn't you say?" The line went dead. I detected Arthur's movements below for another minute or so, likely a perfunctory check of the manor's portals before his stealthy footsteps ascended the grand staircase. I swiftly ceased the recording, tucking my phone beneath my pillow. My bedroom door remained precisely as he'd left it, a telling crack betraying his earlier intrusion. I hadn't dared alter its position lest I alert him to my vigilance. Through the narrow aperture, I observed his shadow glide past in the moonlit hall. The guest suite door offered a soft click as it opened and then shut. For an eternity, I lay submerged in the oppressive darkness, meticulously dissecting the appalling truths I had just gleaned. Arthur's financial obligations were not merely debts. They were monstrous liabilities to individuals of immense menace. He was not a lone wolf. He operated with an accomplice. His scheme to plunder my estate tomorrow evening timed precisely with Clara's regular book club gathering, and then to vanish into the night, dragging my unsuspecting daughter into the quagmire of his own making. The invasion of my chambers, once a profound outrage, now paled in comparison to the scale of this colossal treachery. Arthur was not content with mere theft. He was employing Clara as a shield, weaponizing her unwavering affection and trust to orchestrate his vile enterprise. But he had committed a cardinal sin. He'd misjudged his adversary. He had presumed me a frail, oblivious matriarch, a facile mark. He possessed no inkling that I had devoted 3 decades of my life as a forensic financial auditor before my retirement, or that I had encountered countless individuals, every bit as desperate, attempting to circumvent the system. Arthur wished to engage in a battle of wits with an old woman. Very well, we would soon ascertain the true extent of his cunning. As I lay in the oppressive silence, Arthur's damning confession secure on my device, my mind drifted back to the genesis of this entire sordid affair. 3 weeks prior, Clara's frantic call had violently disrupted my tranquil Tuesday morning. I had been perusing the day's headlines, my coffee steadily cooling beside me when my phone had chimed. Clara's name illuminated on the screen, a familiar harbinger of warmth. But that day her voice was utterly transformed, taut with fear, verging on hysteria. "Mother." She'd begun her voice barely a whisper. "I know it's terribly early, but—" A choked sob had cut her off. I could hear her valiantly battling tears. "Arthur. He was let go from his position last month. We've been struggling desperately trying to keep our heads above water, but we're significantly behind on the mortgage payments." How far behind? I had pressed my hand, already reaching instinctively for my ledger. 3 months. Mother. She'd pleaded the words agonizingly difficult. "I truly abhor asking, but might we impose upon you for a brief period, just until Arthur secures new employment?" The sheer unadulterated relief that flooded her voice when I assented was profoundly heartbreaking. My precious daughter, 32 years old, too fiercely independent to seek aid until she was utterly bereft of alternatives. Of course, she could return to her childhood home. Of course, I would extend every possible assistance. But even in that moment of solace, a subtle disquietude had pricked at the edges of my perception concerning Arthur's plight. He'd been with the same firm for 8 years, Clara had stated, consistently excellent performance reviews. The redundancies were abrupt, unforeseen. Yet when I gently probed Clara for more precise information, her responses had been frustratingly nebulous. Arthur managed all the finances, she'd explained, and he was diligently overseeing the job hunt. She simply trusted him to navigate the situation. I should have pressed harder. I should have posed more incisive questions. 3 days thence they had materialized on my doorstep, a colossal moving van overflowing with an excessive quantity of boxes for what was ostensibly a provisional visit. Clara had embraced me fiercely, her eyes brimming with tears, murmuring fervent thanks repeatedly. But Arthur, he had been markedly different, a chilling detachment. His handshake, though firm, was curt, his eyes already meticulously surveying my residence with a predatory intensity that in hindsight should have sounded every conceivable alarm. A rather exquisite domicile, Eleanor. He'd commented, his gaze sweeping across my grand salon, as if he were an astute appraiser assessing a prime property. An astute appraiser assessing a prime property. I mused bitterly, recalling his initial comment. Back then I'd dismissed it as merely the effusions of a guest, impressed by his surroundings. Now I saw the cold, calculated inventory, the predatory sizing up of his prey. From the moment they arrived, I dedicated myself to their comfort. I'd meticulously cleared space in the guest suite's expansive wardrobe, rearranged my personal schedule to accommodate the new rhythm of 3 inhabitants instead of 1, and ensured every amenity was at their disposal. Clara had settled in with her usual grace, effortlessly slipping back into the familiar routines of her childhood home, navigating the manor's labyrinthine passages as if she'd never left. But Arthur had been a relentless wellspring of unnerving inquiries. He'd quizzed me endlessly about the estate's security patrols, about the times when our most reclusive neighbors were typically away, about my precise financial institutions and how frequently I visited them, about whether I maintained a significant sum of cash on the premises. At the time, each query had felt disarmingly innocuous, the natural curiosity of someone adjusting to an unfamiliar abode. Now the chilling truth was starkly evident. They were not questions, but data points, meticulously collected for a meticulously planned heist. I vividly recalled the morning he had volunteered to drive me to the financial institution. "Allow me to spare you the trip, Eleanor," he'd offered. His smile, a veneer of solicitousness. I need to update my unemployment records anyway. But once inside the hushed marble halls of the bank, he hadn't merely updated his records. He had loitered a silent shadow near the transaction window, his eyes dissecting every movement as I concluded my deposit. He'd then casually inquired about my various accounts, the contents of my safety deposit box. Red flags, bright and undeniable, had unfurled before me, yet I'd consciously, painstakingly ignored them. I craved to believe in my daughter's husband, to validate the man Clara so dearly loved. The specter of his gambling addiction, too, should have been glaringly obvious. Arthur's phone had vibrated and chimed incessantly, a discordant counterpoint to the manor's tranquil silence. Each call was taken in hushed secrecy, Arthur invariably retreating to the garden or the study, claiming to be engaging with potential employers' networking contacts. But I had seen the subtle shifts in his demeanor after these clandestine conversations, the sudden rigidness in his shoulders, the agitated pacing that followed like a caged animal. For the past fortnight, an unsettling stream of official-looking correspondence addressed to Arthur had begun accumulating in our mail. Credit card statements, notices from collection agencies. I'd initially attributed them to the bureaucratic aftermath of his job loss, assuming they were simply updating his address. But now, with the cold clarity of revelation, I understood these were not updates. They were dunning notices, stark final demands, thinly veiled threats. Clara, my unwitting accomplice in his deception, remained completely oblivious to the festering rot beneath their surface-level existence. She trusted Arthur, implicitly accepting his every explanation at face value. When he declared himself in charge of their finances, she believed him wholeheartedly. When he assured her the job market was arduous, but promising her support was unwavering. She had absolutely no inkling that her husband was spiraling into a maelstrom of insurmountable gambling debt. She had no clue that her cherished childhood home was being meticulously surveilled, its defenses catalogued like a target, primed for exploitation. My trusting, loving Clara, unwittingly transformed into the perfect, impenetrable alibi for a grand larceny. The horrifying realization jolted me back to the oppressive darkness of my bedroom, to the chilling weight of Arthur's recorded confession, nestled on my phone. In less than 12 hours, he intended to systematically plunder my estate. In just over a day and a half, he planned to vanish, dragging Clara, my precious daughter, into the abyss of his financial ruin and deceit. But Arthur had committed one monumental, catastrophic error. He had fundamentally misjudged his opponent. He had presumed me a frail, lonely old woman, gratefully clinging to companionship, easily duped. I was not lonely. I was discerning. I was observant. And I possessed 3 decades of professional experience as a financial auditor, navigating the intricate deceptions of individuals who believed themselves infinitely cleverer than everyone else. Arthur wished to steal from me tomorrow night. Very well, let him attempt it. He was about to discover that some old women not only bite back, but they do so with a vengeance. At precisely 6:30 a.m., I awakened, as I always did. The recorded confession on my phone felt like the phantom echo of a nightmare, but the timestamp on the recording, 12:47 a.m., offered irrefutable proof of its chilling reality. Arthur's voice, clear as the burgeoning daylight, meticulously planning my undoing. Downstairs, I methodically brewed a fresh pot of coffee and commenced my habitual breakfast ritual: scrambled eggs, crisp toast, a glass of fresh orange juice. Every detail precisely as it had been for the past 3 weeks, when Clara appeared wrapped in her silken robe, yawning languidly, her face alight with sleep. Softened gratitude, I offered her a warm, practiced smile. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep soundly, like a baby mother? Thank you again for allowing us to stay here." Arthur descended 20 minutes later, his hair still damp from the shower. He exuded an air of rested confidence, the very picture of a man with a meticulously crafted plan. "Beautiful morning," he declared, settling into his customary chair at the breakfast table. "What does everyone have planned for today?" I carefully placed his mug of coffee before him. "Oh, the usual. I might run a few errands later." Arthur's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. "What kind of errands, Eleanor?" "Just odds and ends. Perhaps the hardware store or maybe the bank." I watched him, a tiny muscle twitching almost imperceptibly beneath his left eye. "Nothing exciting," I added deliberately. "The bank." Arthur leaned forward, a subtle tension coiling in his posture. "Everything. Financially sound." Clara chuckled. "Mother's always been fastidious about her ledgers. Just her way." "Not fastidious," I corrected gently. "Prudent. One can never be too vigilant in these precarious times." Arthur nodded, with an almost theatrical vigor. "Precisely. The digital age is rife with pitfalls, particularly for those of a certain vintage." There it was again, the condescending implication masquerading as solicitude. "Which brings me to your estate's security," Arthur pressed on. Our district is quite serene, I offered. Appearances can deceive, he countered. It's impeccably secure, Clara interjected, her voice firm. Mother has lived here for decades without incident. But Arthur's gaze remained unwavering on me. Still a lady of means residing alone in such a grand manor. One cannot be too cautious. There are invaluable pieces here. You alluded to the strongbox in your chambers earlier. Is that where you safeguard your vital papers? I took a deliberate sip of my Darjeeling, weighing my words. Some, yes. And a significant reserve of liquid funds, perhaps, in this volatile climate. It's only sensible to keep ample cash on hand for any unforeseen contingencies. His brazenness was truly staggering. Here he sat at my breakfast table, savoring the very soufflé I had painstakingly prepared, demanding a detailed manifest of my assets. My affairs are well in order, I replied, succinctly. Arthur then pivoted, adopting a solicitous tone. You mentioned last week, Eleanor, that you were quite the sound sleeper. That's reassuring. I often fret over the rest patterns of those in their twilight years. I had uttered no such thing, yet I nodded obligingly. Oh, yes. When I succumb, I'm utterly lost to the world, especially these days. The evenings render me quite fatigued, entirely customary for your vintage, Arthur pronounced. The body demands more repose. Clara shot him a disapproving glance. Arthur, that's quite impolite. No, he speaks the truth, I interjected smoothly. I often rely on a gentle soporific to ensure I'm quite insensible until dawn. Arthur's shoulders visibly relaxed, a subtle shift in his entire demeanor. Excellent. Let him believe me utterly incapacitated tonight. Well, I shall leave you two to your daily arrangements, I announced, rising to begin clearing the table. I foresee an early night for myself. All this delightful familial activity has rendered me more weary than usual. That sounds marvelous, Mother, Clara responded. You've earned your rest. Arthur, helping carry a few plates to the kitchen, subtly cast his gaze towards the grand staircase, towards my master suite, a look of calculation flitting across his features. You know, he remarked with a deceptive nonchalance, I might indulge in some late-night viewing in the salon. I tend to be a night owl. Naturally, he was. I offered a serene smile and a nod. Do make yourself comfortable. The remote awaits on the coffee table. After breakfast, Arthur declared his intention to make a series of calls regarding his supposed job prospects. Clara decided to bring order to their belongings in the guest wing. My window of opportunity had arrived. I believe I shall attend to those errands now, I informed them. Do enjoy some tranquility together. As I carefully reversed my car down the gravel drive, my eyes caught a glimpse of Arthur watching from an upstairs window. Not the guest suite. My bedroom. My grip instinctively tightened on the steering wheel knuckles, whitening. Tonight, I mused. Tonight cannot arrive swiftly enough. My initial destination was the local general store. I required certain provisions, yes, but more critically, I needed an unimpeded space to meticulously review every facet of the impending confrontation. Arthur had broadcast his intentions with glaring clarity over breakfast. Tonight, while I was ostensibly steeped in a drug-induced slumber, he fully intended to breach my sanctuary, retrieve the key he'd discovered weeks prior, and then empty my secure strongbox. A simple, elegant larceny, a perfect coup, against a credulous old woman. Except the key was no longer there. I had relocated it at 5:00 a.m. after lying awake for hours following Arthur's damning telephone call. The small tarnished brass key now resided securely in the depths of my kitchen's utility drawer, nestled inconspicuously beneath a tangle of rubber bands and assorted twist ties. Arthur could ransack my master suite until dawn. His efforts would be utterly fruitless. But merely frustrating his endeavors was insufficient. I craved his public humiliation, his unmasking evidence so irrefutable that even Clara would be compelled to confront her husband's true, predatory essence. Within the general store's notions aisle, I located what I needed. Eleanor knew precisely what she needed. Not merely a marking agent, but a precision-targeted deterrent. She procured an ultrafine, iridescent powder designed to cling with remarkable tenacity and a bespoke air compression dispersal mechanism. Back home, the house was blessedly empty. A note from Clara on the kitchen counter. Gone grocery shopping with Arthur. Back by 2 p.m. Love you. Perfect timing. Eleanor had 3 hours of uninterrupted preparation. In her basement workshop, Eleanor meticulously calibrated the hidden device. The mechanism was elegantly simple. A pressure plate concealed within a false bottom, designed to trigger the dispersal unit when sufficient weight or probing force was applied. She filled it with the iridescent powder, ensuring it would thoroughly coat an intruder without causing any lasting harm. The crucial part was the sensitivity. It needed to activate only when Arthur fully committed to rummaging, not from a casual glance. After several painstaking tests with a weighted ruler, she achieved the exact calibration. Installation required surgical precision. She positioned the modified unit within her dresser drawer, blending it seamlessly into the lining. The trigger would activate when a hand reached towards the very back, precisely where the original key had been hidden. To anyone merely glancing inside, it would appear as innocuous drawer contents, some old silk scarves, a few forgotten trinkets. But reach in with intent and surprise would be the only outcome. Eleanor tested the setup 3 times using a slender stick to simulate Arthur's searching motion. Each test triggered perfectly, sending a controlled cloud of shimmering powder precisely where an intruder's face and hands would be. The device reset, easily poised for its grand performance. Next came the art of deception for the key placement. Eleanor fabricated a decoy, a small antique leather-bound journal, seemingly weighty with important documents with a prominent but inert key tucked conspicuously inside its cover. Arthur would spot it immediately, a beacon of false promise, and reach for it with triumphant certainty, triggering Eleanor's meticulously planned surprise. The genius lay in the psychological warfare. Arthur anticipated stealth, silent success. He'd budgeted for a swift, quiet theft. He hadn't remotely planned for an iridescent explosion that would mark him more distinctly than any bank's die pack. By 1:45 p.m., every element was flawlessly in place. The drawer looked innocent, utterly normal. The trap was armed and ready. Arthur would step into Eleanor's bedroom tonight, expecting to find a helpless victim. Instead, he would encounter 24-karat justice. Eleanor heard car doors slamming in the driveway. Clara and Arthur returning from their shopping excursion, likely feeling domestic and perfectly normal. Arthur had no inkling that his intended crime scene had been transformed into a perfectly orchestrated trap. Eleanor closed the dresser drawer gently and headed downstairs to greet them, her most benevolent matriarchal smile in place. Tonight was poised to be exceptionally interesting. "I need to run out for a quick errand," Eleanor announced after a light lunch. "Won't be long." Clara looked up from unpacking groceries. "Need help with anything, Mother?" "Just picking up something at a specialized electronics boutique," Eleanor replied smoothly. You two relax. You've done enough shopping for one day." Arthur barely glanced up from his phone, yet Eleanor caught the subtle flicker of interest in his eyes. The old woman running errands alone, leaving the house seemingly unguarded, it perfectly confirmed his mental map of her predictable routine. The boutique clerk was a helpful young man named Marcus, who didn't blink when Eleanor explained she wanted a discreet security camera for her bedroom. "Lot of new installations in your area?" he asked. "Something of that nature," Eleanor replied, her tone perfectly serene. "I need something miniature with crystal-clear low-light vision, and it needs to be entirely wireless with remote monitoring capabilities." Marcus showed her several options. Eleanor settled on a compact model no larger than a deck of cards that connected seamlessly to her tablet, boasting motion detection and 8 hours of continuous recording. "You'll want to test the placement thoroughly," Marcus advised. "The app lets you see precisely what the camera sees in real time." Perfect. Eleanor paid in cash and drove home the camera, a tiny, potent instrument resting in her handbag. Upon my return, Arthur and Clara were ensconced in the living room, absorbed in a television program. They exuded an unsettling normalcy, a tableau of domestic bliss utterly devoid of the calculated malevolence of impending thieves. "Just going to rest for a few minutes," I announced, feigning exhaustion as I ascended the grand staircase. "All this running around has utterly depleted me." Once in my bedroom, the door closed with a soft click. I commenced my clandestine operation. The miniature camera required precise positioning. It needed to capture Arthur's every move towards the dresser, his reaction upon engaging the trap, and the ensuing burst of iridescent powder, all while remaining utterly undetectable. Employing the synchronized tablet application, I meticulously tested various vantage points. Perched atop the bookshelf, the perspective was skewed. Tucked behind the alabaster lamp, it stood out with an almost glaring obviousness. At last, my gaze fell upon the nightstand. Nestled expertly amongst the familiar leather-bound volumes, the camera's dark casing merged seamlessly with the book bindings. Its magnetic mount clung with unwavering stability, providing a flawless panoramic view encompassing both the antique dresser and the room's central expanse. To the casual eye, or indeed to any but the most seasoned spy, it was utterly invisible. For a full 20 minutes, I fine-tuned the angle via the app, ensuring maximum coverage and optimal light. The motion detection system was calibrated to activate instantly upon entry, yet possess sufficient discrimination to disregard the house's usual creaks or ambient outdoor sounds, preventing any spurious recordings. Battery longevity was paramount. The device needed to function reliably until Arthur made his calculated move, potentially spanning 8 to 10 hours. I engaged its motion-activated mode to conserve power, then plunged the room into darkness to assess the night vision. The infrared image that materialized on my tablet screen was startlingly crisp. Arthur's features, every subtle flicker of his expression, would be perfectly discernible as he unwittingly activated my carefully laid trap. Furthermore, I verified the audio recording function, ensuring the microphone would precisely capture any incriminating utterances Arthur might make during his transgression, for desperate individuals frequently betray themselves through muttered confessions. The entire setup was a testament to sophisticated simplicity. Arthur would step into my private sanctuary, anticipating absolute darkness and stealthy silence. Instead, he would be meticulously filmed from the very instant he breached the threshold. The camera would document his illicit search, his triumphant discovery of the decoy key, his intrusive hand reaching into the drawer, and the spectacular, incriminating explosion of shimmering powder that would follow. Visual evidence, audio evidence, and physical evidence all meticulously curated in one formidable package. I subtly rearranged a few books for optimal camouflage, then stepped back, a flicker of satisfaction animating my gaze. Everything appeared perfectly normal, utterly innocuous, simply an old woman's bedroom poised for a tranquil night's rest. From downstairs, I could discern the soft murmur of Clara and Arthur's voices, no doubt charting their evening's course. Arthur was likely meticulously calculating the precise hours until his window of opportunity for theft swung open. He remained blissfully unaware that his anticipated window had transformed into a meticulously sprung trap. I performed one final check on my tablet. The camera feed was pristine, the recording function engaged, and the battery icon glowed reassuringly full. Every element was poised. Tonight Arthur would finally reveal the full extent of his depravity, and thanks to the quiet marvels of modern technology, every damning moment would be immaculately preserved in high-definition detail. Let the grand unveiling commence. Dinner unfolded with deceptive serenity, Clara regaling us with anecdotes about recent neighborhood happenings while Arthur, as ever, subtly monitored his phone. I played my role to perfection, the weary matriarch anticipating an early retirement after a demanding day. By 8 o'clock, we had settled into the comfortable confines of the living room. Clara curled up with a novel, while I settled into my customary armchair, making a deliberate show of massaging my temples. Long day. I murmured, my voice laced with feigned fatigue. I think I'll retire early tonight. Arthur looked up from his device with an almost instantaneous alacrity. Actually, Eleanor, he began, his tone conspicuously casual. I was rather hoping we might share a nightcap first. You know, some time for mother-in-law and son-in-law bonding. The suggestion, though seemingly spontaneous, carried an undercurrent of calculated intent. That's sweet, Clara remarked without looking up from her book. You two should certainly spend more time together. I was thinking about that bottle of Macallan I spotted in your kitchen earlier. Arthur continued, his eyes gleaming. Premium stuff, perfect for a nightcap. I maintained my placid expressive. My expression remained a mask of placid disinterest, though inwardly a keen amusement stirred. Arthur, I surmised, had choreographed this moment with the precision of a seasoned predator, likely since our morning repast. The casual suggestion, the timing, the pointed mention of the aged Macallan, every detail was a thread in his meticulously woven web. A kind thought, Arthur. I demurred, my voice gentle. However, my prescribed regimen is rather particular. It brooks no communion with spirits. His practiced smile wavered, a hairline fracture appearing at the corners of his lips. Nonsense, Eleanor, one convivial drop won't inflict harm. We're practically kin. Indeed, I must abstain entirely. Clara, from behind her novel, echoed my sentiment. Mother's physician was quite explicit about her blood pressure medication, but Arthur possessed the tenacity of a leech. Then a mere toast, a ceremonial sip to honor. He searched for a suitable pretext, his eyes darting. To family. He concluded the words tasting like ash. His relentless insistence was a glaring tell. Any genuine well-wisher would have gracefully accepted my initial refusal. Arthur, however, desperately required me to ingest something specific, a potent soporific, to ensure my profound, unawakening slumber. Tell you what, he declared, rising with a sudden decisive air. I'll pour myself a measure, and we can simply converse. No obligation for you to partake. He vanished into the kitchen before I could voice a further objection, the soft percussion of cabinet doors and the faint clink of glass reaching my ears. When he reappeared, He carried 2 tumblers, one brimming with amber liquid, the other conspicuously empty. "A change of heart," he proposed, settling back onto the velvet upholstery. "I've poured you just a whisper for the toast, barely a thimbleful." He extended the second glass. The golden liquid shimmered innocently in the lamplight. But 3 decades spent unraveling the elaborate deceptions of insurance fraud had taught me one unshakable truth. Desperate individuals inevitably leave their fingerprints. "Arthur, truly I cannot." His voice hardened a diamond-edged insistence. "Just a single-minute sip. Clara, assure your mother that one taste won't be her undoing." Clara's gaze oscillated between us, a nascent disquietude furrowing her brow. "If Mother declines, perhaps you should honor her wishes." Arthur's jaw clenched, a muscle rippling beneath his skin. For a fleeting, chilling instant, his carefully constructed facade crumbled. I glimpsed raw frustration, cold calculation, and an undeniable flicker of panic in his eyes. "You know what?" I announced, rising with deliberate care. "I find myself more exhausted than anticipated. I believe I shall take one of those sleeping pills and bid you both good night." The immediate transformation in Arthur's bearing was almost comical. "Sleeping pills. The ones the doctor prescribed last month. Powerful things, aren't they? Knock you out completely dead to the world until morning." A wave of palpable relief washed over his face. "That sounds perfectly ideal. You absolutely require your rest." "Sweet dreams, Mother," Clara murmured, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek. "I'll see you at breakfast." I orchestrated my ascent of the grand staircase with theatrical slowness, my hand clinging to the polished banister, embodying the very picture of an elderly woman utterly spent. At the summit I turned, offering a final benevolent caution. "Don't linger too late, you two. Arthur, feel free to avail yourself of anything in the kitchen." "Thanks, Eleanor. Rest peacefully." Once within the sanctuary of my bedroom, I methodically performed the customary rituals of preparing for sleep. Changing into nightclothes, brushing my teeth, turning down the silken covers. But beneath this performance, a swift final review of my technological arsenal was underway. I double-checked the miniature camera's discreet positioning, ensuring its lens had an unimpeded view, and confirmed that the iridescent glitter trap was primed and ready. I extinguished the bedside lamp and settled onto the bed, remaining fully clothed, my gaze fixed on the sliver of hallway visible through my slightly ajar door. Below the television played a barely audible hum, punctuated by the hushed cadence of Arthur and Clara's conversation, followed by the soft padding of Clara's footsteps, ascending the stairs, culminating in the gentle click of the guest room door. Arthur remained in the quiet salon, I surmised, meticulously observing the clock, calibrating the precise moment my supposed sedative would render me utterly comatose. I glanced at my phone. The camera feed displayed my empty bedroom in pristine night vision, every detail illuminated by its invisible light. The trap lay poised. The stage was set. All that remained was to await the dramatic unveiling of my son-in-law's true, predatory nature. At the stroke of 11:43 a.m., the faint inaugural creak sounded on the grand staircase. I had maintained absolute stillness for what felt like eons, my body a rigid sculpture, my eyes fixed on the narrow aperture of my door, monitoring the real-time feed on my phone. My bedroom, rendered in stark monochromatic clarity, patiently awaited its nocturnal visitor. Arthur ascended with the stealth of a professional burglar, his steps avoiding the specific treads that invariably betrayed their burden with a telling groan. He had, I noted, assiduously studied the peculiar acoustics and structural idiosyncrasies of my manor during his 3 His 3-week residency within the manor's venerable walls had clearly served as an intensive apprenticeship in its peculiar acoustics, for he now navigated its sonic landscape with the finesse of a seasoned phantom. Every whisper of ancient timber, every groan of a stressed joist, every potential betrayer of sound. He had catalogued them all. A floorboard outside my door, usually prone to a protesting creak, merely whispered under his cautious weight, followed by an unnerving stillness. He was pausing. I knew, waiting for proof, that his cunningly administered soporific had indeed lulled me into profound unconsciousness. I maintained a disciplined, rhythmic breathing pattern, a performance honed to perfection, for upon its success hinged not just my vindication, but my daughter Clara's very future. The brass handle of my bedroom door rotated with excruciating slowness, a silent acknowledgment of his calculated stealth. Then his silhouette materialized in the threshold, a dark angular form against the muted luminescence of the distant hall light. He remained transfixed in the doorway for a full 30 seconds, his gaze raking over my feignedly inert figure, ensuring my slumber was as deep and absolute as he'd envisioned. Convinced of his triumph, he finally glided inside. Arthur now moved with the unburdened swagger of a predator, assured of his dominion, confident he was both unseen and untouchable. His dark attire rendered him a near-invisible specter in the dim room. Yet my senses, heightened by adrenaline and a lifetime of observation, tracked his every calculated step, noting the faint shift in the air, the barely perceptible displacement of shadows. He approached the dresser with the chilling certainty of a man executing a meticulously rehearsed operation. 3 weeks of illicit reconnaissance of prying eyes and calculating whispers had provided him with the precise coordinates of his coveted prize, the manual override key to my master safe, the very key he believed stood between him and my accumulated life's fortune. I watched him, a silent observer, as he positioned himself directly before the ornate piece of furniture, his hands almost reverently extended towards the second drawer, the one he believed contained the key, and unbeknownst to him, his most dazzling surprise. The drawer glided open without a whisper. For a fleeting fraction of a second, Arthur's posture exuded pure, unadulterated triumph. He'd located his target, his fingers confidently delving into the shadowed recess, seeking the brass key that would, he presumed, dissolve every one of his pressing dilemmas. And then, with a sharp, pneumatic thwump, my carefully concealed device discharged. The sound, muffled yet impactful, was not unlike a sudden percussive exhalation of compressed air, instantly followed by a subtle hiss. A glorious, shimmering cloud of ultra-fine, iridescent powder erupted from the drawer's depths, engulfing Arthur from scalp to shoe, in a cascade of glittering silver and gold. The surprising puff echoed through the quiet room, a small, subtle yet significant violation of the night's stillness. Arthur recoiled, stumbling backward with a choked gasp, a string of violent expletives tearing from his throat as the ethereal dust settled on his dark clothing, nestled in his hair, and clung tenaciously to his shocked, contorted features. He stood transfixed, looking less like a cunning burglar and more like a human-shaped nebula, a walking, sputtering constellation. "What in God's name?" he choked out, his hands flailing futilely, attempting to brush away the tenacious, shimmering motes that now clung to every visible surface of his person. I executed my theatrical awakening with the practiced precision of a seasoned stage actress, stirring with a convincing gasp of startled confusion. "What on earth was that commotion?" I called out, my hand extending towards the bedside lamp, feigning a tremor. What was that dreadful noise? As the room was instantly bathed in a soft glow, the light revealed Arthur in his full, sparkling ignominy. He remained rigid beside my open dresser drawer, utterly encrusted from head to foot in the telltale, iridescent powder. In his hand, clutched like a child's coveted toy, was the antique leather-bound journal, its decoy key gleaming innocently from within. "Arthur," I murmured, my voice a delicate blend of bewilderment and concern. "Whatever are you doing in my private chambers at this ungodly hour?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, a fresh cascade of fine glitter dusting the floor like ethereal snow. I heard a peculiar disturbance," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically. I feared someone might be attempting a forced entry, breaking in." I queried, my gaze sweeping the room with a display of utter confusion. "And you, my dear Arthur, found yourself in this sparkling predicament." He looked down at his own shimmering form, the full, undeniable horror of his transformation finally dawning on him. He truly resembled a neglected, discarded Yuletide ornament, draped in an embarrassing finery of silver and gold dust. There was some kind of trap, he managed weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "A trap," I countered, my head tilted in theatrical innocence. "In my bedroom, Arthur." From the far end of the hallway, the distinct padding of bare feet hitting the polished floorboards reached us. Clara, roused from her slumber by the earlier commotion, was clearly on her way to investigate. Arthur's eyes widened to frantic saucers. How indeed could one possibly explain being discovered at nearly 3 in the morning, covered in glittering evidence while attempting to pilfer from one's own mother-in-law? "Arthur, Mother, what on earth is happening?" Clara's voice, thick with worry and growing alarm, carried clearly through the silence. Arthur's mouth worked desperately, but no coherent, believable explanation would form. He was caught not red-handed, but resplendently glitter-handed in the very act of his vile betrayal. As the footsteps rapidly approached, I allowed myself the most minuscule, self-satisfied smile. Justice, it seemed, was indeed magnificently sparkly. "Mother Arthur, are you both all right?" Clara appeared in the doorway, her silk robe hastily clutched, her expression a mixture of confusion and burgeoning fear. Then her eyes swept over the scene and she froze, utterly transfixed. There I was, sitting up in bed, feigning concern and bewilderment. And there stood Arthur beside my open dresser drawer, completely coated in a shimmering, damning halo of glitter, his entire deceitful existence laid bare. From head to toe, in shimmering iridescent powder, looking as though he'd been caught in a glittering snowstorm. Clara's breath hitched, her eyes widening. "Arthur, what in heaven's name? Why do you look like some sort of fantastical creature?" Arthur's jaw worked silently, a fine mist of glimmering dust drifting from his hair, with every frustrated movement, settling on the antique Persian rug like a shower of ethereal confetti. There was a disturbance. He managed, his voice hoarse. "I heard a noise. I came to check on Mother at this hour." Clara's gaze sharpened, a flicker of suspicion replacing her initial shock. "And you ended up covered in that." Clara gestured vaguely at the sparkling tableau. "It's some sort of bizarre security mechanism," Arthur blurted, frantically swatting at his now luminescent suit. "It triggered when I opened the drawer." Clara's eyes darted from Arthur's glittering form to the slightly ajar dresser drawer, then to Eleanor. "Mother, do you have hidden security devices in your antique furniture?" Eleanor maintained her facade of gentle, bewildered innocence. "Not that I'm aware of, darling," Eleanor replied, her tone perfectly guileless. I was in the deepest slumber until that peculiar sound startled me awake. But Arthur, why were you delving into Mother's dresser drawer? Clara's voice had hardened, acquiring an unfamiliar edge, protective, undeniably suspicious. Arthur's carefully constructed narrative began to visibly unravel. I was trying to find something to help you sleep, Eleanor. I heard you tossing and turning, and I thought you might have some extra soporifics. Soporifics. Clara's eyebrows, arched incredulity, etched across her features. In Mother's bedroom dresser. Arthur gestured feebly towards the drawer, dislodging another shimmer of powder onto the carpet. I thought perhaps. Arthur, Eleanor interjected softly, yet with an underlying steel. My medications, including anything for sleep, are and always have been in the apothecary cabinet, in my ensuite bathroom. The ensuing silence was thick with unspoken accusations, heavy with the weight of blatant deceit. Clara's gaze shifted between them, her expression transforming from mere confusion to an unsettling blend of disbelief and suspicion. So let me fully comprehend this. Clara stated her words measured and deliberate. You abandoned our bed at 3 a.m, infiltrated my mother's private sanctuary while she was asleep, and proceeded to ransack her personal dresser drawer, ostensibly searching for medication you demonstrably knew wasn't stored there. It's not like that, Clara, Arthur stammered, his voice rising in panic. Then what is it like, Arthur? Clara's voice, though still controlled, vibrated with a rising indignation, because from my vantage point, it appears my husband was systematically going through my mother's personal effects in the dead of night. Arthur's desperation intensified, palpable in the stifling air. Clara, you must understand, I was merely attempting to assist. Assist? With what precisely, Arthur? Eleanor interjected mildly, her gaze unwavering. And what, pray tell, were you truly hoping to discover within that particular drawer? Arthur's eyes darted wildly between Eleanor and Clara, the unspoken accusation in Eleanor's question hanging heavy in the air. I was disoriented, confused, he stammered, swallowing convulsively. I genuinely believed I heard someone attempting to breach the manor. Breaching? Clara echoed her tone, utterly devoid of belief. And your first instinct was to meticulously search my mother's bedroom furniture. I wasn't searching, Arthur snapped, his glitter-dusted hands clenching into tight, impotent fists. Why are you both interrogating me as if I'm some common criminal? I am your husband, Clara. The raw defensive anger in his voice struck Clara with the force of a physical blow. Clara visibly recoiled, taking a small, almost imperceptible step backward. Eleanor watched as the last vestiges of implicit trust in Clara's eyes fractured and crumbled into desolate shards. You are correct, Clara stated, her voice quiet, almost eerily calm. You are my husband. And that is precisely why I am demanding an explanation for why you are standing in my mother's bedroom at 3 a.m, thoroughly coated in iridescent powder, with your hand demonstrably in her private drawer. Arthur stood utterly ensnared, cornered by the undeniable weight of his own fantastical and crumbling alibis. The shimmering powder continued to drift from his clothing, a silent, irrefutable cascade of physical evidence proclaiming his guilt. I can account for absolutely everything, he pleaded, desperation raw in his voice. Then I urge you to proceed, Clara responded, crossing her arms tightly across her chest, her expression unyielding. Because at this precise moment, I am profoundly bewildered as to my husband's true intentions in this room. Eleanor observed Clara's countenance, witnessing the precise instant her protective instincts initially aimed at navigating a strange domestic disturbance, irrevocably shifted from Arthur to her. This was no longer a mere marital misunderstanding. It was a burgeoning threat to her mother, to their sanctuary. Arthur, too, must have registered that profound shift, for his next words were edged with an undeniable tremor of pure panic. "Clara, you must believe me. But trust once, so comprehensively shattered by iridescent powder and transparent lies, proved to be an utterly fragile and non-reparable commodity." Clara's gaze remained relentlessly fixed on Arthur, and Eleanor could almost discern the intricate machinery of her daughter's mind, whirring methodically, processing the devastating implications of the scene unfolding before her. Clara's mind, a complex tapestry of loyalty and growing dread, was frantically weaving the disparate threads of suspicion into a horrifying pattern her heart recoiled from. "Arthur," she enunciated each syllable precise and cutting, "I require the unvarnished truth immediately. What were you truly doing in my mother's private sanctuary?" Arthur's lips parted, poised to utter another falsehood, but I recognized the critical juncture. My daughter, my precious Clara, deserved absolute transparency, not further layers of her husband's deceit. The raw, unvarnished truth, however devastating, was her rightful due. "Clara," I stated softly, extending a hand to retrieve my phone from the nightstand, "there's a revelation you need to absorb." Arthur's face, beneath its shimmering, incriminating coating, blanched to the color of bone. "Eleanor, don't, what?" Clara's voice, a blade of steel, cut through the tense silence. "Don't what, Arthur? Don't what, Arthur?" I repeated, holding up my phone, the small device now a harbinger of doom. "Darling, I captured something on recording last night. A telephone conversation. I believe you should hear it." "No," Arthur interjected, his voice sharp with desperation. "Clara, whatever she imagines, be silent." Clara's command was crisp, her gaze locked on mine. "Mother, play it." I pressed the icon. Arthur's own voice, chillingly clear and undeniably incriminating, filled the room. "Yes, it's me. Everyone's deep in slumber. The matriarch's coffers are undeniably overflowing. I located the entire trove. Bank statements, investment portfolios, every last detail. This isn't just a substantial sum, it's a fortune." Clara's face became a mask of absolute stillness, her eyes widening in disbelief as she listened to her husband's voice, calmly dissecting my financial legacy with an unseen accomplice. "Tomorrow evening, Clara has her usual book club. Every Tuesday, 7 to 9. It presents an ideal window." "Stop it," Arthur pleaded, his voice cracking. "Clara, I can explain." "Silence." Clara's voice was a whisper of pure venom. "Just be quiet and let me listen." Arthur's voice resumed from the phone. "I already possess the safe key. Secured it earlier tonight while they were occupied with dinner. The old woman keeps all her vital possessions there. Cash, jewels, likely a trove of further financial data. The insolent wretch." Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes fixed on Arthur as if encountering a grotesque stranger. "Listen. I understand your reservations about the schedule, but my gambling obligations aren't vanishing. Those individuals aren't known for their patience, if you grasp my meaning. This absolutely must proceed now." "Gambling debts." Clara breathed barely a whisper. "What gambling debts?" The recording, relentless, continued its damning testimony. The matriarch is merely a solitary, trusting soul. I watched the devastation unfold on my daughter's face, witnessing the precise moment her husband's casual contempt for me, his chilling assessment of my supposed vulnerability, his cold, calculated plan to exploit my hospitality, became agonizingly clear. She has no comprehension of the fate awaiting her. Indeed, she even broached the subject of home security during dinner tonight. Essentially, she handed me precisely the intelligence I required. The genius of it is he'd never suspect kin, should Eleanor realize anything's amiss. Clara will merely assure her it's a lapse of memory, a common foible of age. Clara emitted a choked, wounded sound, as if physically struck her husband's words, outlining his insidious plan to weaponize her unwavering trust, to shield his grand larceny against her own mother. Trust me, by Thursday all traces will be erased. I'll inform Clara of a sudden imperative career opportunity in another state. Will vanish before the Dowager even comprehends the extent of her loss. I pressed the stop button. The silence that descended was absolute, a crushing weight in the room. Clara stared at Arthur, tears carving clean paths through the glitter dusting her cheeks. Gambling debts. She whispered the words, barely audible. You were going to plunder my mother's estate. Her voice, though low, trembled with barely contained fury. My God, the sheer audacity. You referred to her as a solitary, trusting soul. Her voice fractured. You were going to steal from her, then vanish into the night, dragging me along as your unwitting accomplice, your perfect alibi. Arthur took a tentative step towards her, but Clara recoiled, as if he were suddenly a venomous creature. How much? She demanded, her voice rising. How much do you truly owe? It doesn't matter. How much, Arthur? Arthur's shoulders slumped, defeated. 47,000. Clara's legs seemed to buckle beneath her. She sank against the polished doorframe, her gaze fixed on the man she had married, a stranger now. You've systematically lied to me for months. She articulated each word a hammer blow, about absolutely everything. Your employment, our financial abyss, the true reason for our presence in this manner. I was attempting to shield you. Arthur mumbled the word, sounding hollow and pathetic. By meticulously planning to rob your own mother. Clara's voice escalated to a raw, guttural cry. By weaponizing my trust as your alibi, while you meticulously planned to devastate the very woman who nurtured and protected me. Arthur made one last, desperate attempt. Clara, we can salvage this. No. Clara straightened her spine, rigid with newly forged resolve. I watched as the fragile girl I knew vanished, replaced by a woman of unbreakable steel. No, we cannot. You deliberately orchestrated a scheme to victimize my mother. You denigrated her with your contemptuous whispers. You conspired to have me believe she was suffering from cognitive decline, all while you plotted to pilfer her life's savings. Clara's gaze, brimming with revulsion, fixed on Arthur. Leave this house, now. Arthur, Clara commanded, her voice ringing with icy authority. Remove yourself from my mother's residence this instant. Arthur, for the first time in Eleanor's recollection, found himself utterly devoid of argument. He remained rooted for a full 10 seconds, the tenacious glitter still cascading from his hair, a shimmering, damning confetti. Then, as Clara's expression shifted, hardening into a visage of unadulterated protective fury, the stark reality finally pierced his self-serving delusion. His marriage was irrevocably severed. This isn't over, he snarled, his tone curdling into something venomous. Half of everything we possess is legally mine. I'll ensure I receive my due. You mean half of our monumental debt? Clara's voice was arctic, cutting through the silence. Because that, Arthur, is all we truly own. Your gambling debts, your colossal liabilities that I, your wife, knew absolutely nothing about. I'll fight you in court for every penny. With what funds precisely? Clara took a deliberate step closer to him, and Eleanor's heart swelled with pride at her daughter's unwavering defiance. You just confessed to owing $47,000 to individuals of immense menace. What leverage do you imagine you possess to fight me? Arthur's last vestiges of bravado disintegrated. His eyes fixed on Eleanor burned with something akin to virulent hatred. "This is your doing, old woman. You poisoned her mind against me." "No," Clara retorted, her voice firm and resonant. "You accomplished that feat entirely on your own, Arthur. The moment you chose to meticulously plot grand larceny instead of humbly seeking assistance. When you disparaged my mother. When you systematically deceived me for months." Arthur attempted one final desperate gambit. "Clara, we are bound by matrimony. We exchanged sacred vows. You desecrated those vows." Clara's voice was quiet but lethal, "the instant you conspired to commit a felony against my own family." Clara pointed towards the bedroom door. "Gather your possessions and exit this house immediately." Eleanor watched as Arthur finally comprehended the stark reality. His elaborate charade was unequivocally concluded. No more insidious manipulation. No more cunning falsehoods. No more pathetic attempts at victimhood. Clara's own husband's words had unequivocally condemned him. Arthur retreated from the room without uttering another sound, leaving a glittering trail of evidence across Eleanor's polished floorboards. From the guest suite, they could hear the bitter violence of his movements as he flung his belongings into bags. Clara, utterly drained, sank into the bedside chair. Her shoulders slumped. "Mother," she whispered, her voice fragile, "I am so deeply sorry. I welcomed him into your sanctuary. I imperiled you. My darling, you could not possibly have known. It is I who should have discerned the subtle warnings, the clandestine phone calls, the predatory inquiries about your financial assets." Clara looked up at Eleanor, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "How long have you been aware?" "Since the night before last. I overheard that telephone conversation and instantly understood I had to safeguard us both." Clara managed a faint, tremulous smile. "The glitter bomb. Mother, that was absolutely brilliant. I desired him to be apprehended, unmistakably caught, not merely red-handed, but resplendently glitter-handed." That elicited a genuine, if tear-laced, laugh from Clara. Just then Arthur reappeared in the doorway, two hastily packed duffel bags slung over his shoulders, still sparkling like a disgraced disco ball. "Arthur, leave your house key on the kitchen counter." Clara stated, her gaze resolutely fixed on a distant point. "Do not attempt to contact me. My legal counsel will communicate with yours." Arthur opened his mouth, a protest forming, but then his expression shifted to one of profound futility. He turned and strode away. A minute later, the resounding slam of the front door reverberated through the silent house. Clara and Eleanor remained in silence for several moments, listening to the distant rumble of Arthur's car as it started, and then receded into the vast darkness of the night. "May I remain here?" Clara asked quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Just until I manage to process everything. My darling girl, this has always been and will forever be your home for as long as you desire it." 3 months later, Eleanor was in the kitchen meticulously brewing her morning coffee when Clara descended the grand staircase dressed in the smart attire of her new position at the local archival library. Clara had embraced morning routines with the same methodical precision Eleanor had always admired. "Good morning, Mother," Clara greeted warmly. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep soundly?" Like an infant. Clara poured herself a mug of coffee and settled comfortably at the antique kitchen table. Any lingering misgivings regarding the infamous glitter trap of that tumultuous march? Eleanor chuckled, a rich, resonant sound, only that I lacked the foresight to record his precise facial contortions the moment it detonated. Clara's divorce had been formally concluded merely 2 weeks prior. Arthur surprisingly had contested absolutely nothing. It was, Eleanor mused, exceedingly difficult to argue over asset division when one was simultaneously confronting potential felony charges and burdened by $47,000 in egregious gambling debt. "Is the library particularly active today?" Eleanor inquired. Story time at 10, followed by assisting Mrs. Holloway with her genealogical research. Clara's smile was genuine, radiating contentment. "I adore it there, Mother. It's tranquil, serene, and populated by individuals who genuinely cherish the profound solace of literature." She paused. "Thank you, Mother." Clara murmured, her voice thick with gratitude as she lingered at the threshold. "For protecting me, for handling everything with such grace, and most of all, for trusting me when it truly mattered." After she departed, I retreated to my kitchen, savoring the warmth of my coffee as I perused the morning paper. The manor at long last felt utterly serene, a tranquility it hadn't known in countless weeks. No insidious tension, no web of deceit, no calculating mind plotting to undermine my generosity. My phone chimed, then a text from Clara. Forgot to mention. It read, "Mrs. Albright called. She's desperate for your advice on a new security system. Apparently your ingenious methods of home defense have become the talk of the town." A genuine, unrestrained laugh bubbled from my lips. Perhaps I mused there was a market for patenting the glittering deterrent approach to personal security. Outside, the nascent spring unfurled across the tranquil landscape of our community. My neighborhood remained precisely as it always had been, peaceful, secure, utterly unmarred by Arthur's fleeting destructive presence. Justice, I mused, was often dispensed within the solemn confines of courtrooms or through the diligent efforts of law enforcement. Yet sometimes it manifested through an unwavering trust in one's own intuition, through the careful orchestration of well-laid traps, and through the profound, unavoidable clarity that allows individuals to expose their inherent, true natures. And sometimes, most gloriously, justice sparkled.